First of all, we think about evidence as information or data that either supports or rejects a position or a conclusion. The latter is very important. We need evidence that is disconfirmatory as well as confirming evidence. And that's where we often go wrong in advising in the policy world. We tend to tell people what they want to know or give confirming evidence. It's our duty to say that there may be disconfirming evidence. There may be negative evidence as well as positive. And that's what we do with research. So this is we try and get a balance of the positive and the negative, the intended and the unintended. There may be unintended consequences we haven't thought of. So that's the first thing we try and address when we do a review. Second, we're talking about the probability of something working or not working, or something happening or not happening. Okay, evidence is seldom, if ever, definitive. Okay, it's the best we can do is say there's a degree of probability that something will happen. Now, in the social, political, and economic sciences, we tend to work at the 95% level. We're prepared to be wrong 5 times in 100. Now, most of you have come here by plane. Would you get on a plane if you thought it was going to crash 5 times out of 100? You're nodding. You would not do that, nor would I. That's because the airline industry works at the 0.001 level of probability. They only want to be wrong 1 in a million or 10 million times, preferably not at all. Okay? That's also so, by the way, for space scientists. Though I see yesterday a spaceship did go wrong. Everything has a probability. And what we're trying to do is to at least get our probability of being right somewhere around 95 times out of 100. But it's a fairly low level, because remember, we may be doing more harm than good, and that's what we need to know. The job of the synthesis is to try and pull those contributes together so that the decision maker knows the pros and cons, the intended, the unintended, and so forth. Fourthly or fifthly, we think that evidence should be both generalizable and particularistic. We need to know that in general, farmer field schools, which is what this group we're looking at, have an impact or do not have an impact overall. But we also want to know whether they do or do not work in South Africa or Ethiopia or some particular place, or maybe down to a much lower zonal level. So when we do reviews of evidence, we try and find the general and the particular. Evidence is always contested, I think I've said that. But evidence is seldom self-evident. This is really important. We often hear people saying, the evidence tells us. Think about it. Evidence does not talk. It has no personality, okay? You make sense of evidence. You tell what the evidence tells us. It's a very important distinction. Evidence does not tell us anything. We interpret it, and we interpret it in terms of our experience, our expertise, our local knowledge, the people that we meet in informal networks. That's how we bring evidence to life. And that's very important. We acknowledge that when we do our reviews. And this is what we want to focus on for the remainder of our session, is not only is not all evidence of equal value, but sadly, not all research evidence is of equal value or even of sufficient quality. So when we do reviews of evidence, people like Alex and me, we often reject up to 1/3 of the studies from peer-reviewed journals. There's something wrong with them, either in the way the project has been done, or more typically, the way it's been reported. They haven't reported the full data set. They give us average median effects or mean effects, but haven't talked about the range or the standard deviation or what have you. Very common stuff that we teach first-year undergraduates on how to write. We find these errors being made in the peer-reviewed journals. So a message here is, just because something's in a peer-reviewed journal does not mean it's high quality. It should be, and there's a group of us working with the editors of peer-reviewed journals to up the ante, to raise the threshold. But that's another reason why we do these reviews of evidence, to separate the wheat from the chaff is what we call it. We do this by a series of we call critical appraisal methods. So the last point we want to make about evidence in general is single studies can be dangerous. The most dangerous thing we have is the latest study has shown. Whenever you hear the latest study is shown, your antennae should go up and say, I'm not sure about this. I will give you an example. 2 years ago, BBC Radio, #1 radio station for news, a highly respected news station, 6 o'clock in the morning, its top story was, the latest study has shown that breastfeeding in the first 6 months of a child's life is injurious to their cognitive development. That is wrong. It's doubly wrong. It's 250 times wrong, because we have got over 250 high quality studies to show us the contrary. It was a rogue study, and it somehow got its way into a prestigious North American journal and went out through the media. By 10 o'clock that morning, we had nursing mothers across the UK phoning their doctors, their midwives, saying, should I stop breastfeeding? Undoing 10 years of development in public health messaging by one rogue single study. So please, sometimes you get a real zinger, a really important single study, but you have to be as critical of that as any other study. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to pool the evidence to try and avoid those outliers. That's why we need research synthesis, okay? We're going to cover these 5 types of research synthesis. Statistical meta-analysis, that answers one type of question. Narrative reviews do another type of question. Rapid evidence assessments, qualitative systematic reviews, and evidence maps. Okay, Alex, you want to talk a little bit about the question about what is high quality evidence in both quantitative and qualitative research?
Thank you. So the message is research synthesis. We understand why we need research synthesis, but to me, the really compelling power of research synthesis is that you're looking for quality evidence. And there are things we can do to assess the quality. So I'm just going to run through a couple of these. So we talked about the methodology, how clear is it? The internal validity, are the conclusions based on the data that was used in the study, that was deduced from the study? Is the sample size the right sample size? Is it consistent with your findings? The rigor, have you accounted for bias? The adequacy of reporting. This is a real problem. Phil has alluded to this in the past. Are you reporting positive and negative findings? Are you making your data available? Are you transparent about how you've carried out your studies? Are you using the right statistics? Adequacy of reporting is one of the biggest reasons we reject studies that go into research synthesis. External validity. Is it contextually relevant? Is the data applicable beyond the context in which it's, the research is carried out? And there's this tension, it's a false tension between quantitative and qualitative. But we also have criteria we use to assess qualitative studies as well. Appropriate sampling. Are you purposefully sampling? Are you targeting the right group to answer the question you're trying to understand? If you're trying to understand behavior in HIV populations, is your sample actually looking at the general population, or is it looking at the HIV population? So is the sampling method appropriate to the question you're trying to answer? How well executed is it? Is the research design approach the right research design approach to answer the question you're trying to understand, or the problem you're trying to understand? How are you collecting your data? Are you triangulating it? Are you confirming, particularly when you use things like surveys and focus groups, are you confirming the information you're finding out by other means? How are you doing that? How are your questions being phrased? Sorry. We're kind of covering them anyway. And this other issue, are you reporting positive and negative findings and transparent about how you're carrying it out? So to me, we have this criteria, and each of these, they're fairly high level. But Phil's group will have a series of questions they use as a checklist to actually see if studies actually match this criteria. So this idea of quantitative being better or qualitative being less good is false. We assess quality across both.